Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Obsidian-Radio with your host Najee, a show dedicated to opening our minds to other realities. Please listen, learn, and enjoy.
Okay, sounds good.
Hello, everyone. This is episode 9 of Obsidian-Radio. Today we'll be speaking with Jim Harold of the Paranormal Podcast. He has been podcasting since 2005, has hosted the Paranormal Report, the Paranormal Podcast, and Jim Harold's Campfire. He worked as a certified digital media consultant before podcasting, and has also written a series of 4 books entitled The Campfire Collection, True Ghost Stories. And hello, Jim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on the program. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So, if I remember correctly, weren't you at the Paradigm Symposium last weekend?
No. I guess the organizers ended up rescheduling that for the spring, but I have been at the Paradigm Symposium the previous 2 years and was scheduled to be there this last week, but they ended up rescheduling that for the spring. So I don't think I'm going to be able to make it at that particular date, unfortunately, but we wish him the best with the event.
Oh, okay. So we can't really talk too much about that, but okay. I guess actually I want to go back a little bit before you started podcasting. I'm not actually sure what the, what is it called? Digital media consultant is? What is that?
Basically, I'll kind of just give you my story, and it'll be included in that. Basically, what happened was I went to school for broadcasting, and that's back in the days, because I'm in my mid-40s, so I'm old. But this was back in the days when they were still using for audio, reel-to-reel and razor blades. We didn't have all this fun computerized stuff, which I certainly love. And so anyway, I went to school to be on air. Primarily television is mainly what I was trained in. And one thing they tell you when you get out of broadcasting school, or this was college, but I had a broadcasting focus, is if you can get a job at a radio or TV station, take it, because you get your foot in the door. And I got my foot in the door as a sales assistant, helping out salespeople. And this particular station I worked at, it was a lot of fun, and it was a smaller station, so I got to do a lot of different things. I got to write commercials and things. I'm like, well, this is not so bad. And I saw the salespeople, and they got to write commercials and do fun stuff. And I'm like, well, that's not so bad. And I ended up in sales for, about a dozen years. I started in radio in 93. And in 2005, I found myself, I'm like, I'm never going to actually get to broadcast. And I worked, in between that time, I worked at a number of stations. And I found that when you got to bigger stations, it wasn't quite as much fun, because you didn't get to do all the fun stuff you got to do at some of the smaller stations. So I thought, well, I have a family now. I have a wife and 2 kids. I'm not going to necessarily be able to just quit and go after my dream job. But what I can do is I hear about this new thing called podcasting. This is back in 2005. So what I'll do is I'll start a podcast for fun, and that's how the Paranormal Podcast started. Now, let me go back and say the certified digital media consultant thing is that over the years, I also became involved with radio stations and helping them with their digital business, their internet business, internet advertising and things. Because that's what a salesperson at a radio station does. They work with advertisers and get them on the air and so forth. And I did that for on-air commercials and so forth. And then I started doing that for internet products. And that's where the certified digital media consultant thing, that basically means I just passed a test by the Radio Advertising Bureau that I am qualified, and I knew all the jargon and so forth. But anyhow, so in 2005, I started the Paranormal Podcast for fun, and I kind of dabbled for about 3 years. I put out a show, wouldn't put out a show for 4 or 5 months, put out a show. And then 2008, I got serious. And within 6 months, we had the first sponsor of the show. And then I started the Campfire Show in 2009, and just kept growing, and I started my Plus Club, which are all my premium podcasts, because I have a lot of free podcasts, but I also have ones that people have been listening for a while, and they really enjoy the topic and enjoy the programs. They can get my premium podcasts. And I noticed that, this was really catching on. And I thought, well, gee, if I only didn't have this full-time job in the way I could really grow this. And so in 2012, about almost 3.5 years ago now, I said, well, let's see what happens. And with the blessing of my wife, I quit my day job and became a full-time podcaster. And so far, so good. So we do the Paranormal Podcast, which is the most recent 90 days you could get for free on iTunes, anywhere you hear podcasts, or at my website, jimharold.com. We have the Campfire Show, which are people's true ghost stories. That's what the books are based on. And that's also the most recent 90 days is free at jimharold.com. And we also periodically put out the Paranormal Report with our friend Micah Hanks. So it's a full-time job, and I enjoy it very much. And beneath all of this is the reason I picked this particular topic is because I'm really interested in it. I really do think there's more to life than what meets the eye.
Right.
Doesn't mean I believe in every single thing, but I do believe there's a lot going on that we don't understand, and it's fascinating for me to hear, everyday people who have experiences, and also talk to the experts and authors who have theories about what exactly is going on.
So you're like open to these ideas, but still a bit skeptical, like healthy skepticism?
Well, I think so. I mean, kind of one of my models is keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out.
Right.
So, the one thing I will say with my Campfire books, I really focus on trying to put stories in those Campfire books where I feel people are being sincere. They really feel something happened to them. So, I can't vouch for each individual story, but I believe the storytellers are being very legitimate in what they're saying and very legitimate in what they feel they experience. So it continues to be interesting to me, and it's a fun way to make a living, and it's also very interesting. The funny thing is, when I first started, I thought, well, I'm going to have, I'm going to do this for 6 months. I'm going to talk to all these great thinkers and authors and things and have this all figured out. The truth is, Najee, that I have more questions now than I had when I started.
I keep hearing that from everybody that gets into this. That happens to every single person.
Yes. Yeah, because you think you kind of understand what's going on, and then you'll hear an author talk about something. It's like, well, I never thought about it that way. So, yeah, that's exactly what's happened to me. I've recognized I even though I, quote, know a lot more than I used to know, I actually feel that I know less, if that makes any sense.
So what's the actual difference between the three shows, the Paranormal Report, the Paranormal Podcast, and the Campfire?
Well, the Paranormal Podcast is a program where we interview authors and experts about their opinions. So a lot of times we'll have authors of books on. So somebody has a new book about Bigfoot, or a new book about UFOs, or a new book about ghosts. And we'll come on and we'll interview them about what it is, what their perspective is. So, for example, this coming October here, we have Chip Coffey, who's going to be on. Of course, you know him from television. We just interviewed Michelle Belanger from Paranormal State. We've got Amy Bruni coming up. You know her for Ghost Hunters.
Yeah, I've heard her before.
And then we have a lot of authors as well. We just did a show with a woman who says, Deborah Moffat, who said that she lived with an entity for a number of years, and we talked about her story. So that's the Paranormal Podcast. The Campfire is a show where actually just everyday people sign up, they call in, and we talk to them about their stories. They're not authors of books. They're not anybody trying to sell anything or anything like that. They just come on and they say, look, this is what happened to me. And a lot of them, there's people who are really into ghosts and those kind of things, but there's a lot of people who say, hey, nothing funny and strange like this has happened to me before or since, but this one time, this very strange thing happened to me.
And the Paranormal Report? The
Paranormal Report is basically more like a news show. And that's where we talk about stories in the news. I do that about once a month with my friend Micah Hanks. We were doing it more often, but it became too much for the schedule. So we ratcheted that down to about once a month. But that's a lot of fun, too.
So you've been doing this for about 10 years. So this is like a full-time job now?
Yeah, this is my full-time job, believe it or not. Between that and the books, I'm very busy. And then I have a number of podcasts that are in my Plus Club. which people subscribe to. There's a UFO podcast. There's a ghost podcast. There's The Other Side, which is more kind of new agey type things. We have a crime scene podcast, a conspiracy corner podcast, and the newest one that we've launched in that area are Ancient Mysteries. So we just did an interview on that one with Zachariah Sitchin's niece. So, I mean, I guess, between all those, you figure I put out between 4 and 5 podcasts a week, plus the books, plus, everything, administering everything. It makes for a busy work day.
So it is possible to make podcasting into like a full-time job. Yeah, but I mean, for me, my feeling is that I would never tell anybody they couldn't do it because I've done it.
I think... and some people may be much faster about it, but people have to remember, at least in my case, it took 7 years before I took the plunge, and I've been doing it for about 3.5 now, almost. January will be 3.5 years because I started in December, I guess. I started in June of 2012 full time. So can it be done? Absolutely. Would I consider it easy or something that's going to, happen overnight? I think you probably got a better chance of being a full-time YouTuber. That seems to be more conducive to full-time employment. But the point is that it is. I do believe it's doable.
So, what would be your recommendation if someone wanted to start podcasting that's trying to make money off of it?
Well, first of all, I would just try to start and then evolve into the money-making part of it. Because you got to remember, unless you have a platform, like if you're already an author or a radio or a television person, or you have some kind of or maybe you're a blogger that has some kind of online following, but if you're just starting from ground zero, it's going to take a little while to build an audience. So the main thing I think that you can do if your ultimate goal is to make money with podcasting, and I'd say this about YouTubing or whatever, is to put out the best content you can put out, and then opportunities will present themselves, and you'll find opportunities. So I think that the best thing to do is put out the best content that you can on a consistent basis, and then work up towards it. I mean, maybe there are people out there who put out a podcast and 3 months later they're making a living at it, but I don't see many of them. Unless again, they're people that have some kind of, following. I think of somebody, and I'm not saying he did it in 3 months, but somebody like Leo Laporte, who has his very, very much more successful than my little group of shows. Yeah, he's a tech journalist, and he has a great network of shows. But he had a following when he started, and he started back in 2005 before I started, certainly. And he was doing it professionally far before I was doing it professionally. But my point is that somebody like that, he could say to his radio listeners, because he's syndicated all over the country, hey, check out my website. That makes a big difference. So if you're starting... But I start from ground zero. Nobody knew Jim Harold or knew me in regard to the paranormal. It was kind of like Jim Who, the pod what? I would have to, when I first started, and for several years, I had to explain to people when I asked them to be on the program what a podcast even was. So, I mean, it cuts both ways. On one hand, I got on board very early, which was very beneficial. On the other hand, I was fighting an uphill battle because I was working in a medium that nobody had ever heard of. So it kind of worked both ways. I'm glad I got in when I did, but I still think there's a ton of opportunity out there. If you think I think the last thing I heard was maybe a third of the American public has listened to a podcast, and people say, isn't that great? A third has listened. Well, that means that 2/3 haven't. And that means, or even if it's half, because those may not be the most up-to-date numbers. But my point is this, is that there's a great deal of opportunity out there. So I think if you've got a passion for a subject, go for it. And I think that people think, it's not like a cash register. You just don't, it just doesn't start ringing because you turn it on. I mean, but the thing is, for example, I think that podcasting business-wise has a lot of implication for people who are in business. In the old days, when let's say somebody was a mechanic, right? They would go buy time on, or a car dealer, or an investment person. they would go to local AM radio station and pay, several $100s a week to get a spot on the radio so they could say they had a, quote, radio show, and they could establish their expertise and get known in that way. And now you can do the same thing in the comfort of your own home through a podcast, and you don't have to pay anybody several $100s, and you don't have to be in, on the air at like 8:30 on a Saturday morning. You can do it yourself, and you could be worldwide. So, I mean, really, the opportunities are limitless. But the thing that it takes, I think, to be successful in it is just a ton of persistence and just keep doing it and realize that it may not be overnight. Now, not to say there may be somebody, it may be you or somebody listening, who may start out and they just may build a following overnight. Maybe something about them is that special and they have whatever that certain something is. I know for me, it was just a long, hard slog to build it over time, but it seems to be working. It seems to be continuing to build. But I encourage anybody who wants a podcast, I say go for it. Why not?
I was going to ask, is it better to be sponsored, not sponsored? Does it even matter when it comes to your revenue stream?
I think that you can go either way, but I think that, I didn't start offering a paid subscription until I had been podcasting for 6 years. So I think it's kind of tough to come right out and start asking people to pay for podcasts or any kind of media without any kind of if you haven't established your expertise in the area to the public. So I think in a way, sponsorship's great because that's opportunity for you to find companies that you think they've got good products. And even now I take sponsors, but I always check the companies out. And I always check their products out to make sure that I feel comfortable. When I worked in radio, stations would take almost anything. Not every state. There were some stations I worked for that were very particular, but most stations, as long as you had to check, they would, yeah, sure, we'll do it. As long as it wasn't anything obscene or anything like that. They didn't really, look deeply into the companies. Whereas I try to look companies up, I check them out. I actually ask them to send samples of their product to make sure it's, I feel good about promoting it. So I think sponsorship's a good way to go. I just think you ought to need to be careful of who you're aligning yourself with, because I think more so in podcasting than almost any other medium, it's a very personal medium, and people want to feel that they can. I think there's a natural trust there, and I think if you try to violate that to make a few bucks, I think that's short-sighted. But I think as long as you're dealing with good, solid companies with products that you believe in, I don't think there's a thing in the world wrong with taking sponsors.
It feels like with podcasting, it feels like there's more about quality instead of quantity.
Exactly.
And it feels more like there's more of like close-knit relationship, I know.
Yes, there is a real bond between listeners. I mean, I feel, they're listeners over the years. I know them, maybe I haven't met them personally, but I almost feel like I know them personally. We've corresponded and I really appreciate it because they let me do what I do, and that's a really unique opportunity. And if they weren't listening, it wouldn't happen. So I feel a special connection to them.
Do you remember being on Grimerica?
Yes, it's been quite a while ago, but I certainly remember being on there. Those guys are awesome. I've met them, and they're nice guys. We met the Paradigm Symposium events, and I like them a lot, and it was a pleasure to be on their show.
They're one of my favorites right now.
Yeah, they're very good.
And I remember when you were on the show, you were saying something about the rising of podcasting in general and how it went up and down since about a decade ago.
Yeah,
it was really big in 2005.
2005, yeah, 2005. It was 2005 or 2006. It was the word of the year, and everybody said this is going to be the greatest thing. This is going to be the greatest thing. And then there were people who come out, the next 2 or 3 years saying podcasting is dead. But the thing for me is that podcasting was never dead. My audience grew. I think now, particularly in the tech space, there's this belief that, everything has to be 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds. It has to be meteoric growth. But I think what happened with podcasting, two things. One, it just organically grew over time. And then the big development, which I think threw a rocket on the back of podcasting, was a smartphone. Because in the early days of podcasting, you had to take your iPod, you had to plug it up with a wire to your computer and sync, and it was a real complicated thing. Now, and even on Android, which, you know, people say isn't as good with podcasting as Apple, but even on Android, there's a lot of great apps, and you can pick your shows and just stream them. You know, you can download them ahead of time if you want to save your mobile data when you're home with your Wi-Fi, but it's as simple as like installing an app, and even on Apple, the newer devices, anything running one of their last couple of systems, you don't even need to download anything. The podcast app is automatically installed. So, I mean, really everybody is walking around with the perfect podcast receiver, and I think that's grown it. And then we've seen things like in the last couple of years, Serial from you know.
That sounds familiar.
Serial, yeah. It's the biggest podcast in podcasting history.
Okay.
And the thing about it is, I'll tell you the moment I knew podcasting was here to stay. And it was only maybe a year or two ago, when I saw Saturday Night Live did a parody on Serial on the podcast. When I saw that, I'm like, okay, we've arrived. Podcasting is here. It's not going anywhere.
Okay.
So I really believe that podcasting is going to become more and more important. It was interesting. And Najee, you sound like you're a pretty young guy. You may not remember this. What did you say?
26.
26. Okay, so you may not remember this, but back in the day, like when Johnny Carson hosted the Tonight Show, comedian, if they wanted to break, or if they wanted to get their big break, they got on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. You know, at that time, there's 4 stations. You know, and that made somebody's career. You know, somebody like Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor or George Carlin or those kind of guys. So anyway, it's interesting though. I was listening to a comedian being interviewed on one of the local stations here. I'm in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and he said, "You know what? These days I get more reaction if I'm on a good podcast than if I'm on the Tonight Show." Oh. Yeah, and to me that's like wow, and because he said, for example, he was in Ireland one day, and you know, touring in Ireland, and some kid walks up to him and says, "I love your stuff." Now, you know, years ago, this guy was from Chicago or somewhere. I don't know where he was from in the U.S., but it's truly worldwide. I mean, and you know this. I'm sure you have the same thing with your program. You have. I have listeners in Australia, New Zealand, China, South Africa, the UK, of course, Canada, Mexico. I mean, it's just crazy. It's great. It's really, you have the opportunity to really, truly speak to a worldwide audience, and it's awesome.
Okay. Man. Such a bright future. Oh, one thing I did want to say is, so how long has podcasting been around in general? About the same 10 years, right?
Yeah, it actually was invented pretty much by 2 guys. You probably know this, Dave Weiner and Adam Curry. Adam Curry was famous back in my day for being a VJ on MTV when MTV actually played music videos. He does sound familiar, yeah. Adam Curry, and basically what they did is they took a RSS feed and an audio file and slapped an RSS feed on it. Really, Adam Curry is probably, you know, I've heard him called the Podfather, and that's probably pretty accurate. And, you know, he had his program, The Daily Source Code, for years, and I listened to that before I started out. And then was listening to Leo Laporte, who is another one of the great pioneers. I mean, the thing is that I started in, July of 2005. These guys had started in 2004, early 2005. So These guys were really super. I mean, I guess in some ways I'm a pioneer. I'm very early on. There's not a lot of people, you know, who have podcasted longer than me. But these guys were really at the very, very, very beginning. And hats off to him. I mean, Adam Curry is a guy I could go up to and say, "Sir, you personally have changed my life because of podcasting. My life is completely different. I probably would have never been able to be in front of a mic, and it would have been I think it would have been a tragedy for me. I mean, a person, not a humanitarian tragedy, but for my life, it would have been very, very sad because that's what I always wanted to do. And this has given me an outlet to do it. Because if I had gone to a radio station in 2005 and said, well, you know, I was a broadcasting student, I was actually pretty good, and I think you ought to put me on the air, they would have laughed at me, and then they would say, well, we've got this nice slot at 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and if you want to pay us $500 a week, we'll be glad to put you on. So, I mean, podcasting, really, it's taken, before you had to ask permission. Can I please broadcast? If you're passionate about politics or you're passionate about sports or music or whatever it might be, you had to go ask somebody permission. May I speak about this on the air, and may I do it in your prearranged formats and so forth? And now you don't have to ask permission. I often say you could have a podcast on bottle cap collecting if that's what floats your boat.
Because one thing I like about it is that it feels like it's growing slowly, but like have you ever heard that axiom about the star that I can't remember how it goes. What does it go? The one that burns twice as bright burns half as long.
Right.
It's that same idea. It's growing slowly, but I feel like it's going to have more longevity, and I love that.
Yeah, it's not a fly-by-night thing, I don't think. And I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And I mean, the other thing that's coming, it's starting just now in the last year or two, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, is in-car integration of these systems. Like Android Auto, and CarPlay. When you go in your car, either system, you're either Android or you're Apple, your car recognizes it and it comes up and there's right there. I know on the CarPlay one right there, there's the podcast icon. Then it starts getting as easy to listen to as radio because we're not quite there yet.
Not quite
there yet, but I think we're going to get there. And when it becomes as easy as listening to the radio, then I think all bets are off. It's going to explode even more. So I think the future is extremely bright for podcasting.
Because that's the thing that's been talked about for like the past couple of years of the Internet of Things. Everything in your house is going to be connected to the Internet, not just the computer. Yeah. So, yeah. It's
good stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting stuff.
So my next question is, why did you get into the paranormal side of it?
Well, I was when I decided to start podcasting, I thought, okay, there's a bunch of different stuff I can podcast on. Politics, I'm not going to add anything. I have my political beliefs. I keep those out of the show, but the thing is that I'm not going to add anything. Music, you can't do music because copyright issues. Exactly. Yeah. And then sports, what am I going to add on sports? And then I'm like, the paranormal. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. It goes back. Now, you won't remember this because it was around before you were, but when I was a real little kid, there was this TV show, and I was fascinated by it. It was called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And it was kind of like Unsolved Mysteries, but before Unsolved Mysteries. I loved that show. In fact, I've got a DVD set of it right over there on the shelf. And I'm actually giving away on my website, a DVD set, 21-disc set of it. If people sign up to my free email newsletter over there at jimharold.com, I'll randomly draw one person in the continental U.S. for that in October. So that might be a good thing for your listeners to go check out and sign up to my email list.
I'm going to try to link to it.
For no other reason, just to be entered into that drawing. But anyway, I love that show. Anytime, and this is before I ever did the podcast, I go to a bookstore, I go to a library. First section I go to is the paranormal. I was always fascinated by it. I was always frustrated I could never really find any answers, but I was always fascinated by it. So I thought, boy, this is really a natural thing because not only can I actually broadcast by podcasting, which I'm going to enjoy immensely, but I can do it on something that I'm actually interested in. And the thing is that I think that because a lot of times, you worry that people say, well, you're just doing this topic because it's hot and it's popular and everything. And it's like, no.
Not necessarily, no.
Because the thing is that there were a lot of years that I did this that I made $0. I actually was in the other direction. I was paying, I was paying for bandwidth, paying for websites, paying for equipment. For the longest time, it was not a cash positive situation. I did it because I loved podcasting and I loved the subject. And I do think there's something to it. Again, does it mean that I believe in every single theory that comes across my podcast from different folks? No, I don't. You can't possibly believe in it all because some of it's mutually exclusive. But you can certainly believe in some of it.
So, when you say the paranormal, what are the different things that you talk about?
Well, I cast a really wide net. I don't, some people say when you talk about the paranormal, they just talk about ghosts. I really talk about everything from UFOs to ghosts to cryptids to just weird things like time slips. Basically anything in Forteana, I will talk about.
Is any of them your favorite, or is it about all the same, or how do you feel about that?
Well, they're pretty equal, except my greatest question, and I think a lot of our greatest question is life after death, what happens. I'm fascinated by out-of-body experiences, for example. Because I think that's one of the ultimate questions, maybe not all of us will see a UFO, and maybe not all of us will see Bigfoot.
Right.
But I hate to say it, but all of us are going to die.
Yeah.
And so we're all going to have to experience that. So it would be interesting to know what comes up next.
So what is your opinion on the future of world consciousness? Because people are really starting to question everything more, and they expanding their mind into different ideas.
Well, I think you just kind of said it. I think that people are going to continue to investigate these things, and it's only going to grow and grow. I'm not one of those people that say, hey, I think we're going to, I've talked to people who say, I think we're going to have answers about life after death in 15 years. And it's I don't necessarily think this. Some of these things I hate to say, I'm in my mid-40s. I hope I'm on this planet at least another 30 years, I hope. And I'm not convinced that by the time that I'm done that we'll have any answers. But it's fascinating to talk about. But I do agree, more people are into this. I think the truth is that more people are into it to some extent, but to some extent I think now it's more permissible to talk about it. So I think people don't hide the fact they're interested. I think people have always been interested in this. You can go back to things like Lilydale and whether the Fox sisters were a hoax or not or whatever, but you can go way, 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 way back, and you can go back thousands of years. People are interested about these big issues. What happens to us after we die? What are ghosts, or do ghosts exist? Does God exist? What are UFOs? All of these go back many, many years. So I think it's something that's always been with us, but now I think it's a little more permissible to talk about, and I do think interest is increased.
Your opinion of mainstream science and how they're becoming, to me, I feel like they're becoming more dogmatic to a certain degree. Would you agree? Well,
I will say first of all, God bless mainstream science, because there's a ton that they do for us. In fact,
I love science. I just feel like a certain part of it is just
I would agree that in some cases, mainstream scientists can be completely dogmatic. And I think that here's the problem as I see it, is that I think everybody has biases.
Yeah.
No, I actually know everybody has biases. And including me. And including anybody that listens to my show. And some people's biases, I believe in everything and it's all true. And other people's biases, I believe in none of this and none of it's true. And no matter what you show me or tell me, I'm still not going to believe it's true. And I think sometimes amongst the mainstream scientists, it's well, we're objective and we understand the way it is. And you guys are just crazy. And, we control for our biases. And it's I don't know that you can control for your biases, because the way you design a study, the instruments you use to conduct a study, all of that's biased inherently by its design. So I think it's not the fact that they're dogmatic, but the fact that they're unable to recognize that they're dogmatic is the problem.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. Now, you talked a lot about Leo Laporte and Adam Curry. Who else would you say was a major influence on you when you got into this?
I think that some of the influences went beyond just podcasters.
No, just
I grew up very interested in broadcasting, and I was a communication student, and I was so geeky about broadcasting. I actually enjoyed the broadcasting 101 class in college. Everybody else was asleep and wouldn't come to it. And they'd be talking about the history of the NBC red and blue networks. And I'd be, that's fascinating. And then what happened? I was really into this stuff. So, I would actually credit most of the major broadcasters that I've watched and listened to over the last 40 years.
Oh, wow.
Everybody from Larry King, and I actually remember when he had a radio show, and that was when he was really in his prime. He was fantastic. People like Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, Geraldo Rivera back in the day when he was on 2020 before you were born. I mean, just great. Charlie Rose is a great example. Even people like David Letterman and Johnny Carson. People, I mean, I've always tried to. One of the things I do pride myself about is I do think I'm a pretty good interviewer, especially when it's I'm not saying every interview is a gem, but especially when it's a topic that I'm really into and really interested in. And I would hope that I borrowed a little bit from some of those people to try to incorporate just by watching them over the years. I mean, it's kind of like, if you're a basketball player, you've probably watched everybody from Michael Jordan to LeBron James to Dr. J. And somewhere in the back of your mind when you're playing, I'm sure you think, I wouldn't know. I don't play basketball. Well, I'd be a pretty sad sight if I did. But in the back of my mind, I got to think, well, how would Michael Jordan attack this? Or what would LeBron do? Or those kind of things. Like a student of the game. And I've considered myself. Another guy's Tim Russert. Believe it or not, political guy. But these people over the years, you listen to them so much and you're like, okay, well, what would they ask? Or what would they say? How would they attack this? So I'm really into that part of it. And that's an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that. I like that question.
Oh. So in the past 10 years, who have you met that you really like in podcasting these past decade? I think you met Nick Redfern already, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't really met that many people because I don't go to that many events, but I've become very friendly with some people. Certainly Micah Hanks, who I do the Paranormal Report with now, has turned out to be a very good friend. Clayton Morris, who I used to do the Paranormal Report with, is a professional broadcaster nationally, and I'm very friendly with him, and it's great to get to know him. All the different authors. You mentioned Nick. Actually, he's doing some writing for my website now. He's doing a monthly article for my Paranormal Brain Trust feature that I'm doing. Also, I've got people like Marie D. Jones. Micah's doing a column. Ryan Sprague, Teresa Argy. Those people are doing columns for me, so I'm expanding the website to be not only just my podcast, but also some long-form writing from other people. So that's another thing people can check out at jimharold.com. So really, I mean, I've grown quite a, it's hard to single anybody out. It's just I've become friendly online with a number of authors and experts, and it's just been great. I mean, it's been fantastic.
Basically, it's like a community of content producers.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Now, I actually want to get to the Paranormal Podcast and what's the things that go on in different episodes that you like?
Well, I just like the exchange of ideas. And one of my favorite things is when somebody says what I just said to you. Oh, nobody's ever asked me that. Or that's a really good question. I enjoy that. I like when I've maybe not caught them off guard, but made them think. Because, when somebody does so many of these interviews, they all start to sound a little bit the same. So my favorites are when I surprise them, not in a negative way. I'm not doing like a Wallace setup thing, but just made them think about a question maybe they hadn't been asked, or maybe they're being asked in a different way.
Do you have any favorites, or is it all about the same to you?
No, I have favorites. I mean, you mentioned Nick Redfern's always a great interview. Marie D. Jones is always a fun interview. Stanton Friedman, I've only got to interview him a couple times. He's always a favorite. Brad Steiger has always been a favorite, although I haven't interviewed him in a couple of years. I don't know how active he is these days. So no, there's definitely favorite people, and the best way to tell that is the ones you see that come back again and again. Another guy who hasn't been on as much lately who's a favorite is Jeff Belanger, ghostvillage.com. He's a great author, and actually, even though he didn't podcast, even though I think he's a couple of years younger than me, I looked up to him a lot, and I do look up to him because he started his paranormal website and his writing and so forth several years before I did. So I've always looked up to him and think he's a good example. So yeah, there are certainly favorites over the years.
Now, are there any episodes that like stand out to you that you could like recite now or not?
Thinking back, well, I mean, it's tough because I've done over 1,000 shows. So
yeah.
sometimes,
I'm just curious
it's like they, you know, it's one of those deals where you can, you know, after I get off the call with you, I'll probably say, "Oh, that was a great one." But I'll take a look here and see what I can find, which ones I like. I mean, there's some great. I'll give you some great Campfire episodes. I just did one a few weeks ago with a woman, and it's probably still on the free side. I think it's called The Flat Not Taken, and that one is one where somebody basically said something to the effect that they had a premonition of 9/11, for example. So, or their husband had a premonition that saved their life. You know, we have a show called the Haunted Roadhouse, which is now in the Plus Archives, which tells a story of a woman who was afraid of being trapped in a mural, of all things. We had one of a painting that came to life. Just fascinating stuff.
Huh. I'm actually looking at some of your more recent ones right now. Let me see. What's this one with the haunted high school?
The Haunted High School. That was someone that went to high school where I believe a girl died, and repeatedly all these strange things would happen. Basically, the good thing for the Campfire favorites are the books, because I find my favorites. For example, in the most recent book, there's a story about a woman who felt she was being chased in a car by a demon. And it got so bad that she actually drove to the police station because this guy, she felt he was really strange. His eyes weren't shaped correctly. It was just he looked evil, was trying to ram her on the road. She drove to a police station, and then come to find out when she tells her boyfriend about it, he says, "Oh, that must be the demon I was working with when I was a Satanist." And she didn't know he had been a Satanist. And it's one of those things where just really, really frightening stuff. So some of my favorites are really in the books, and this fourth book just came out.
Oh, it just came out because I'm looking at. I saw only
September.
3 at first.
September. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No wonder. Okay. Could you talk about the books a little bit, or?
Yeah, there's 4 books. Each one of them has about 70 stories in them. And they've done quite well. They've been supernatural bestsellers on Kindle, in the Kindle category. 3 of the 4 have, and the 4th one I think will make it. And they're just the stories, slightly cleaned up in terms of just for flow and things. And folks sign up and tell their stories, and I pick the best ones for the books. And each book is about 250, 260 pages, somewhere in there. And you can get it in Kindle or paperback. The easy way to find that is to go to jimharoldbooks.com.
Now, when did you write the first one? And what's the times that you wrote each one of them?
The first one came out in 2011, and that was with a traditional publisher. Mm-hmm. And then in 2013, I came out with the second one. I took that one independent. I did the same with the third one, which was 2014, and this new one's 2015. And then eventually I got back the rights to the first book, so now I have all 4 books.
Oh, so you didn't do traditional publishing with the last 3?
No. For me, it worked out better to do this independent publishing. That's what seemed to work best for me.
Who should you publish with, Lulu? Lulu.com?
Actually, it's through Amazon.
Oh, Amazon publisher. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's CreateSpace, but CreateSpace is owned through Amazon.
Okay.
And folks can order the books. And the nice thing, I have a professional artist who does the covers. I have a professional layout person that does the layout. So it turns out that's one of those things where that it's one of those things where it's indistinguishable from a book you buy in a bookstore.
Now, what's the actual format of writing those? When people send the stories in, they email it to you, they mail it to you, they tell you the story, through audio?
No, they actually, well, what they do is we have certain times where we record, and they say, I sign up, then I call them, and we record, and they know at the time that's on the form there that they could be included in a book. And we record the stories, and then after I record the stories, I put them together and I assemble them into a podcast.
Oh, so it's an audiobook.
No.
I'm looking
the podcast, the stories come from the podcast. So we create the podcast, okay? And then a few months before the book comes out, I go through the next 50 or so podcasts and pick the best stories.
Oh, okay. So that's
the stories come from the actual podcast.
Oh, nice. Okay. So, do you have any other stories that you want to talk about that you've written about or done podcasts for the Campfire or no?
Yeah, sure. One of my favorites is in this new book, Campfire 4. It's about a physician in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And basically he was just starting out as a doctor. I guess they call it qualifying over there. And he was working in the emergency room one night, I believe it was. And he gets a call on his beeper. Over there they call it a bleeper. And calling him up to the 4th floor to help with a patient of cardiac arrest. So he goes, he's walking up the stairs to help. And he gets to the 3rd floor. And this man comes out of this ward, a patient, elderly patient. He has a mint T-shirt on. Nothing else, waist down. And he looks kind of disoriented. And the doctor calls to the nurses, say, "Nurses, can you come? Somebody help this man." And then he goes up to the 4th floor. He just figured it was an older patient, maybe with dementia. He said it was unusual, but things like that happen, with older patients and things. And then basically what ended up happening was he got into the room, and guess who was lying in the bed in full cardiac arrest? The man with the mint green T-shirt that he'd just seen moments before. Oh, and the man's in obvious distress, doing very poorly. He's kind of taken aback, and somebody says his name's Farbod. Farbod, is there something wrong? And he said, no. And he just went about his business, but he was shaken. The man dies. He thinks, oh, my goodness, what could this be? And he goes down to the 3rd floor and talks to the nurse and said, well, did you go out and get the man I told you about? And said, well, we were actually kind of shook up because there was nobody there. So one has to wonder, was that soul of that man leaving and passing the doctor who was on his way to save him? That, to me, is one of my favorite stories.
Wow. There's another story I'm looking at right now. Some 227, Phoenix Lights East. There was a Phoenix Lights phenomenon on the East Coast?
Well, it was more like that. Let me just find the story so I have it in front of me.
Yeah, it's 227 Campfire.
227.
June 17th.
June 7th. Oh, you're talking about on the... Okay, I thought you were talking about in the book. Yeah, somebody had seen some lights that they kind of equated to like the Phoenix Lights. It wasn't as widespread or anything like that, but they equated it to that. And it sounded kind of similar. I don't remember the specific detail on that because, again, that's been, it's been several, I think that's 3 or 4 months ago. So honestly, I don't remember the specific details, but in that case, I believe it was a person who had an experience that reminded me a lot of the Phoenix Lights, yeah.
Let me see. I want to actually look the latest one you had about these dolls that stare at people.
Yeah. That's a good one. That was one from an Australian listener, and she was staying at these people's house. She had, I guess, her and her parents had had falling out. She was a teenager. She was staying with this family, and I guess in Australia they have bedrooms that are actually sometimes they have like a set aside in the yard, like a separate structure. And she would stay out there with this girl, and this girl had this collection of dolls. And like a couple of times, she would go to bed. This girl would go to bed. I guess there were 2 beds in this arrangement here. And this woman would wake up, and all the dolls would be looking at her. Yeah, kind of freaky. Okay. And then, so the 3rd time, and she thought it was the other girl pulling a trick on her. She's like, yeah, she's just pulling a trick on her. Well, the 3rd time, the girl wasn't there one night. She went to bed. She woke up, and guess what? All the dolls were looking at her again. And there was nobody there to move them, so they must have moved themselves. So this woman says that, she hates dolls. She won't have a doll in her house. Her daughter, in fact, won't have a doll in her house. They're just totally against it because of everything that's happened.
I've heard a lot of stories like that for the past couple of years about these weird dolls.
Yeah.
Weird. Okay. Now, Micah Hanks. I actually might want to talk to him in the future. What does he do?
He's a writer, and he's a writer. Not only is he a writer, he's also a podcaster. He has his own podcast, Gralien Report.
That's what. Okay, so that is the same. Okay, I just want to make sure I got the same one.
So he does a very nice job, very erudite. He's particularly specialized in the area of UFOs. Knows a lot about UFOs, and he's a younger guy. He's between your age and my age. I think he's a little bit older than you and quite a bit younger than me, but really a shining star and a good writer too.
Okay. So if people want to get in contact with you, they want to go to your website, buy your books, they want to get the what was that thing you sent me in the email? I can't remember the name of it.
I think I sent you a Kindle book.
Yeah, you sent the link to the free Kindle book.
Yes.
If people want to get all that, what's all the information and links that they need?
Yeah. Well, the Kindle book was free for you because you were interviewing me. But if you want to get I just didn't want people to think they get a free Kindle book, but they can get. I can tell you what they get for free.
Yeah, what's the other thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I can tell you what they can get for free. They can get the last 90 days of the Paranormal Podcast and Campfire over at jimharold.com and iTunes. They can sign up for my email newsletter for free.
That's the one I was thinking of.
jimharold.com. Yes, they can sign up for that for free. And then if they want to buy the books, they can check those out. And I've actually set up a link on my website where they're all listed out so you can pick and choose. And the nice thing about this series is you don't have to read them in order, and you don't have to read all of them. They kind of all stand alone. They're just selections of stories. You can start with 3 and go to 1 and then 2 and then 4, whatever direction. And that's jimharoldbooks.com for the books, jimharoldbooks.com for the books, and jimharold.com for everything else.
Oh, so it's 2 websites.
Well, actually, jimharoldbooks.com just forwards to a page on my website, which has my books. But I just think that's easier for people to rock.
And then they can get your 4 books on Amazon.
That's true. They can also get them on Amazon. That page over at my the page at jimharoldbooks.com has links to them on Amazon. And you can go directly to Amazon, too, and search for Jim Harold, Harold.
Ah, nice. Very nice. I think that's it for now. I'm glad I had you on. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Najee. I appreciate it, and best of luck with everything you do.
Same to you. You have a nice one.
Hey, Najee, where can I hear this show?
Actually, I'm on YouTube right now. I'm going to try to set up a website in the future, but right now I'm just restricted to only YouTube.
Okay.
So if you go to YouTube and type in Obsidian, that's OBSIDIAN -radio on YouTube, and it'll pop right up.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck with everything. I hope it goes really well for you.
I appreciate it. And when I have this posted, I'm going to email you just to let you know when it's posted, so you can see it that way too.
Okay, thank you so much, Najee. I appreciate it. You have a great day.
You have a great night too.
Bye-bye.
And that is it for this episode of Obsidian-Radio. Thanks for listening, everybody, and stay tuned for more episodes. Peace. That's the end of this episode of Obsidian-Radio with your host, Najee. Thank you all for listening. I hope you learned from it and enjoyed. Please check out the Obsidian-Radio YouTube channel and Google Plus page for episodes of the show. Also check out the RoboMan5 YouTube channel and Google Plus page for my rants, blogs, show episodes, and my original music. And finally, check out the Obsidian-Radio website for episodes of the show and episode archives. Please like, share, subscribe, and or donate to be a part of this radio show. There will be more enlightening and entertaining episodes posted soon. Peace.